Verify in reference to you having to leave your car there.
You know, there's a senior police officer who was standing by the roadside as I was swerving off, and I was telling him this is a terrible system. Then he said, what? Then he said, traffic. Then he said, oh, that's development. Very senior, very young, and relatively organized in his presentation, but completely without a clue on the economics of infrastructure and economic development of the country. So this has been a fudged system since 1985 July. But you know, since it's an introductory element, no, the politics here has been one which has been controlled by guys who have no clue about democracy, no clue about governance, no clue about public services. But of course, since you're just introducing me and I'm introducing to you my frustrations, I can tell you that no, democracy and politics died on July 1985, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, the frustrations you speak of, the Sheikh here also had the same experience having to come for the show. So it is neither here or there,
well,
as you already say.
Yeah.
So is it a development that we should be blaming?
You know, we have trouble.
Because you left your car.
Yes,
very
fast. Most of us.
Yeah.
Outside Uganda, traffic jam is a normal phenomenon in the whole world.
True.
Whether in the UK, whether in the US, whether in Dubai, you'll be held up by traffic in those peak hours of people moving out of their homes. But you know, our guys are good at shaping perspective in their own advantage. I wouldn't take any offense with my brother when he makes that submission.
All right. Speaking of, you know, the vast examples that you've given us of Europe and what, Sheikh, let me start with you. African politics has been, you know, generated in such a way that it is almost aligned entirely to an individual for, you know, for a party to progress or proceed onto its desires. Then there's also the element of lack of internal democracy. What's the future? What's the plan? Why are we here as a party? There's also the suffering of the inter-party and intra-party politics here and there, the conflicts that have happened. For this case, most recent for us here in Uganda, we do have the FDC split into the two factions that we have today. So there's several shortages here and there. The scramble and petition of finances. How do these parties get to be financed in order to, you know, champion their causes and all? And then there's also the lack of experience, something that Joseph has mentioned, that the ones that have been able to be given these opportunities lack some experience here and there. All these are part of our politics by and large. Could you investigate for us why this is the case? Where did it stem from? And if maybe one day we can remove that stem and grow a whole new tree?
I want to agree with you that you can't separate parties from individuals, because most of these parties begin as movements and end up forming into or being regionalized into political parties. And I will draw a few examples from the whole of Africa, starting from South Africa, where you have got ANC, where you have Pixley, you have Zangiberere starting the ANC. Then you have these gentlemen moving it from one step to another, fading off the scene, but you still have ANC standing. Then you have a case of Kanu in Kenya, where you see Tom Mboya, you see Ojinga, you see James Gichuru, forming a coalition of three political parties to come up with the Kanu, which of course later on dies out, but having outlived the time of its founder members. Then you come to North Africa, where you have got the MB, the Muslim Brotherhood, which survived from 1928 up to recent when it was banned out. So political parties begin as movements led by individuals, and therefore they quietly have to survive on the charisma and the contribution of these individuals. But we have seen some of them outgrow these individuals to survive up today. So ANC has survived, still surviving with the biggest political party in South Africa, and it would survive in the next half a century or even more. And so it's not automatically true that political parties strive on individuals, whereas there is a contribution which they make. Of course, for Kanu in Kenya, yes, with the demise of the founder members and lastly Mzee Arap Moi, of course that charisma lacked, and they had to die out. It was not because of the death of founder members only, but also the internal cohesion of the party was partly contributed to the collapse of the party. And of course, the funding, it's true, the funding of political parties in Africa is not yet strong, because the members in the political parties have not known their primary contribution to the party. People think a party is a vehicle to economic gain, that when you're a member of a political party, it should be the one to sustain you. Whereas in both democracies like USA, the conservatives in the UK, you see them contributing to the growth of their political parties, which is not the case in African political parties. You know, we had one of the oldest political parties in Uganda, the DP. The DP, because of issues of funding and collaboration, had to establish a relationship with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation so that it could survive in terms of funding. And so, whereas the founder members have got a contribution which is somewhat bigger, but people have not realized their role they can play in ensuring that these political parties survive, especially funding. Now, you gave an example of our home here. I don't want to speak about the part of my brother, the UPC, because it is still surviving, but is on drip. We saw a split in FDC. And to me, as an individual, I think it's because the founder member at some point left the political party and became an orphan when he was still alive. That's Dr. Chiza Besigye. I think if I had stayed in steering of the political party of FDC, we wouldn't maybe be seeing the split which is happening. But also the source of funding for FDC had been its membership in parliament, which was quite big, and therefore was making a very big contribution. But because another political party came up and became the biggest opposition party in parliament, and the funding was taken away, now the absence of the founder member, the absence of funding from government, of course, had a contribution to the split we are seeing in FDC. Whereas some people can argue that there is interference from the ruling government, I don't think it is true, because there is no substantial evidence to prove that there is interference from the government into FDC management of its internal issues that has caused it to begin splitting. Okay. I think the real issue is, if we go back to the discussion, is the absence of the founder member who should have gripped together the party, but also the absence of funding, which could be external funding, which was cut off by the rise of NUP, and FDC falling out as the biggest political party on the floor of parliament. And therefore, the point could be, whereas founder members have got a percentage of grip on the party, but the issue is the people have not known in Africa the role they have to play in ensuring that these parties survive. For us, we think when you become a member of the political party, it should be the party to make you survive, but not making it survive. And that has made most of the parties collapse at infancy.
Okay, that's very interesting analysis. Joseph, they did point out UPC, but as you give us your own views on this particular, line of conversation, we made focus so much on, the current opposition parties, and forget that perhaps the likes of FDC came from the NRM, split in ideology, caused them to move away and say, you know what, let's find our own place where we can push and advocate for the rightful political ideology. So there's a split there that no one ever really makes reference to. So in that regard, and also in regards to the fact that, as for example, UPC, one of the founding political parties for the multi-partisan dispensation we have, what have been what has that journey looked like in terms of surviving and also staying true to the mandate for which you're in the opposition?
I think Kasim is trying very hard to blackmail Ugandans to stick with NRA on the basis of the argument of the founder leaders, because it will be very persuasive, particularly to younger Ugandans who have no idea about the context of foundations and rootings and bases of political parties and organizations. So it will be very tempting for people in NRA, particularly in the current state where there is political uncertainty, that let's take with Comrade Museveni and his thing. I must say that no, political parties are not founded, well, generally, political parties are founded around social bases, social grievances, and in a very particular way, they are really less about individuals in traditional sense. If anything, political parties should be rooted around ideology. Now, on the basis of what you're saying about FDC and NRA, I'm not quite sure whether their split was ideological, because I don't know what founding ideology for NRA is. That's part of the problem. That's why the recent formation by Mr. Museveni's son is a political organization within a political organization, and you don't know what they represent, nor do you actually know what NRM does stand for from an ideological perspective. In any case, I don't want to be so harsh to my colleagues in FDC, other than being a good political organization that gave Mr. Museveni a bit of a run for his money. Ideologically, nobody could say what exactly FDC represents ideologically. But taking it back to UPC, we are actually the oldest political party, founded in 1952 as Uganda National Congress. Our founding president was Ignatius Musazi. We outlived that because we were founded around very specific sets of grievances at the time, pushing for the Africanist agenda in terms of the basic needs of our people, in terms of at the time particularly the African rights in terms of health, education, fair wages, and access to services in the then colonial British system. And fast forward, we went on to then become the organization that pushed for independence. So at independence is very clearly that the case that we're a center-left political party incoherent. That really, because of our values and foundations, we've existed today. And while we're actually quite sick, we're not particularly on the deathbed, as my brother would say, but it's been generous to us that we are possibly in a better position to revive ourselves than any other political party. And precisely for that point, we are the political party of the future. A founder element syndrome from the Uganda People's Congress ran with the charisma of Milton Obote, who turned around Uganda National Congress into Uganda People's Congress to this big, massive political party. That, yes, has been a contribution that you would possibly link to the founders. But our founder relationships probably cannot be linked to the NRM relationship, because Milton Obote never personalized Uganda People's Congress. He basically enhanced and built the democratic systems and structures in the party, to the extent that perhaps sometimes some people possibly blame him for some of what will eventually later happen, particularly when NRA, NRM, and DP guys came to power. The challenges facing the Ugandan opposition political parties today, as I said, not except for DP and UPC, with very, very specific clarity in terms of their foundations and values, has really been also around personalities. And those personalities have really not been in a manner in which you'd say that is the standard bearer for political parties, because again, I have a slightly different view in terms of the foundations for the African National Congress. I've got a different view in terms of the foundations for KANU in Kenya. In any case, possibly the more popular political leader within this region outside Uganda is Julius Nyerere, and CCM has sustained itself, but not in the name of Julius Nyerere, and none of the Nyereres are actually at the heart or control of this. Linked to that is the question of resources. As I said in a joking way at the beginning, maybe I'm going round a bit, from 1985 July, actually, unfortunately, once UPC government fell and DP got manipulated by NRA and others into joining Mr. Museveni in this monolithic one-party thing and killed political parties, it killed not only the foundations and principles of political parties and organizations, but also killed democratic polity. When Museveni came in, he killed political parties. So you could actually argue that political parties died for about 20 years until they got revived. What happened was an entrenchment of a monolithic one-party personal merit polity. Hence where we are at the moment, where politics is very much about me, myself, and I, and the push is very much about money. The push is very much about what is it that we can have for myself. Priscilla, I get very, very worried. I meet many people of your caliber and the social groundings. People will tell you that they're very much disappointed by what's going on at the moment, and they want to go into politics to cause change. And within that conversation, will tell you, I want to become a member of parliament. I want to go to parliament in the next 2 or so years, but I'm not sure yet which political party organization I should go for. So now those people are telling you that they really want to go to the National Assembly for themselves, even if they will say they want to go and cause change. It's not very clear. Politics, Kasim, is about competition of ideas, but based on coherent ideology, because traditionally it may be a bit boring for you here. Right, left, or center left, as it were. Okay. Here it has been very much about what do we get rather than what then do we go ahead and represent. As I said, I complain about infrastructure.
So that's a big question that you pose. What do we get? But the word that I would like to double line there is who is we in this regard? Is it the people who are wanting the political space or the political light, or is it the people who are supposed to be benefiting from those people getting the political space and light?
I think that's
a very big question, for which we're going to be answering right after this break. But of course, that mention of some things here that we'll tackle in depth when we return from this break. Stephen Bide will be joining us to give us a traffic update on where these gentlemen left their cars, and then we'll be back in studio.
On issues concerning our education, because some schools have already been warned to close if they don't take action for now.
All right, thank you so much, Stephen Bide, for keeping us on ground with what the state of traffic is like this Monday morning. Of course, now schools are fully opened for first term, and so that definitely is going to be a huge inconvenience on the business sector of things, but life goes on. Figure out how to get to your destination at the earliest convenience using the same route. Don't go for the panya-panyas. Speaking of panya-panyas, because of disagreement with the main parties, you do have people who have ideologically separated from their primary parties to form other parties. Panya parties. Joseph. Okay, just to give you a backbone of where we stand right now, the Sheikh gave us some submissions for which we picked some things that sometimes people are using these political parties as vehicles for economic gain. He also did make mention of the growth of political parties. How can we grow them, grow the structures, away from the alignment to the individual? Should that individual also pass on? What's the determination of survival for those parties? A matter that we'll integrate later on. Also, Joseph making the fact known that politics has become so much about me, myself, and I. It all has to be centered about me, around me, and that was one of the questions people are asking, that if you are the founding father of a party like FDC, why do you want to be the one to, cause the scramble and petition of the very same party? And you also did make mention of economic gains for people. Now it's become very commercialized politics for us in Uganda, best example, and the question of ideology. What is the founding ideology to make sure that the party can exist to meet its mandate? Now, speaking of which, one of those parties is in the spotlight as of this morning. The National Unity Platform claims that some of its councillors from different divisions here in Kampala have been a part of an orientation, they call it capacity building meeting and training, that had been organized by the NRM leadership in places like Garuga, in Wakiso, in Entebbe, and they've come out to say that this is actually not true. But in light of this, what's the translation that you pick out? What's the message that you're picking out from such a rise of instance? So let me start with you, Sheikh.
Regina and the viewers, I believe that every hour has got its own need. So where we stand as a country today, there are needs. Politically there are needs, socially there are needs. And politically, in my own view, we might be needing a dialogue or a conversation. But I will stick to the second or the latter, which is a conversation. And of course I will bring it down to Kampala or Central Region. Central Region is dominated by NUP as a political party in terms of local leadership. Almost all the seats were swept by NUP, and therefore it has got the numbers which determine allocation for services to be given to the people. But the NRM won the majority of Ugandans and formed the government, and the government has got resources. Therefore, there has to be a conversation between a political party which has got numbers and a party which has got resources. Whereas I'm not here to confirm whether NUP councillors attended any gathering of NRM, but from the objective point of view, I would not see any problem where people who are sharing governance of our country sit together and have a conversation on how to ensure that the ordinary Ugandan, the Mwananchi, gets a service, because this is what expected. The person who voted President Museveni to form a government expects a service. But also the person who voted the NUP councillors and the entire political structure of NUP in Central and Regional, and especially Kampala, expects a service. Now, how do these two teams deliver a service which is expected of them from me, from you and the viewers? They have to sit and have a conversation. The problem is when this conversation happens or is happening, there is misinterpretation from what I would call subjective individuals, subjective voices. People who think that when you are a party in government, when you are the lead party in government, you should not have a 1 point cup of tea with an opposition. You see, whereas someone could be in opposition, but that person is not an enemy in terms of the real enmity. This is a government in waiting, which could have had points which can be captured and improve services for Ugandans. So if it is true that NUP councillors had a meeting or sat in a conversation with the NRM councillors or ruling councillors, I would see it as a positive step in a positive direction for our country. We cannot deliver services in Kampala, we can't deliver services for Ugandans unless we sit and agree. The government has money, but this money is allocated by councils. They are the ones which sit and say, our priority as part of governance should be roads, should be drainage. And the government has got money. So when there is no conversation, when there is no relationship which is objective for these two antagonistic parties, then the person who suffer is my aunt who casted a vote that brought NUP in leadership or in leadership. So whereas we can take the discussion of NUP meeting NRM as, in my view, as a street talk, but I would emphasize that the country called Uganda needs this conversation to have service delivered to the people. Putting politics aside, putting sentiments and emotions aside, we all have a debt. We all have a social contract with Ugandans, which shall be assessed after 5 years. And the assessment shall be based not only on making noise. It won't be based on how you talk and the masses galvanize around you. The assessment shall be based on what have you delivered in terms of the promises you made to the Ugandans.
Okay.
And you can't deliver these promises unless you sit on a table and agree.
What I hear Sheikh saying here is that ideally, as far as multi-partisan politics is concerned, that opposition should be the alternative government, should be giving alternative solutions and direction to what is happening, and that cannot happen, unless there's opportunity to actually have dialogue and react or respond or advise thereof in certain ways, so as to ensure at the end of the day, quote unquote, service delivery to the aunt that he has made reference to. And therefore, let's first integrate the fact that even if this meeting ever existed, would it have been wrong?
It depends on the circumstance. To an extent, Kasim is right. But I must say this, that opposition members crossing and interacting with governments is not necessarily new. In the first UPC government, DP members actually formally crossed to UPC. And in Obote 2, UPC 2, DP members, particularly from Busoga, actually crossed en masse to Uganda People's Congress. Even then, in Parliament, every other after budget speech, Paul Semogeri would sit with Dr. Milton Obote, and they would have conversation and they would share in the brethren way. The clarity in Parliament was very, very, very apparent that there was deep Democratic Party opposition, their position, as it were, and the governing political party governing. But number two, across the country, the local councils or county headquarters, hospitals, schools, services were provided by the governing political party, and at no time would old Milton go to a particular district and say, you voted badly, so therefore you are not going to get the services that you need. What has happened recently, though, is that, and NUP is right to be concerned, is that Mr. Museveni has not shown ability to be a leader that leads for all and in diversity. So you're either with us or you're against us. So in any case, therefore, for them, their job is to co-opt rather than to cooperate, and that seemingly is what's happening. If you see some of the things that has happened in our own Uganda People's Congress, with people meeting Museveni in darkness, and cases and stories of FDC stories in the DP and all these other political parties and organizations, is very clearly the case that unfortunately the guys who don't know how to do the politics are the governing political party. But that said, actually, when I was coming and when I was still stuck in that traffic before I made the decision to branch off and find my quickest way here, I was actually thinking that part of our problem, Priscilla, because I think we're going around, Sham won't be there, part of the problem is I think we seem to be having too many opposition political parties. There are too many, and in many cases, so therefore, in terms of leadership, we are not particularly privileged to have every other Monday morning, a voice that is speaking on behalf of all the people of Uganda, but the alternative voice to Mr. Museveni. So we have a voice sometimes coming from NUP, UPC, DP, and sometimes many of the emergent political parties. Hence, in many cases, the confusion. But why I'm saying that is that in the event that actually that we had a much more cohesive, organized, possibly united, single voice alternative opposition, Mr. Museveni and his regime would continuously be held to account on many of these other issues. I think it would also be easier for many young emergent people into politics to see many of these things and then take a position to decide, are you going to go to the Museveni side or to the other? But in the broader populace, people would be seeing the void. I have always argued that this regime hasn't really been sufficiently held to account. What normally should happen in government, and we're discussing opposition polity generally, is that politics should be about service deliveries. One of the reasons why UPC is the political party of the future, again I was thinking, is when a
can happen. It shouldn't be limited to a time frame.
No, I'm not saying that. By the way, I'm emphasizing the point. You're absolutely right. But I happen to be lucky sometimes, Kasim, draw some of my experiences elsewhere. I worked in and lived in UK, and I worked and lived in an environment in which my local council predominantly would have been, thankfully, to the political party that I associate with, but not necessarily sometimes the members of parliament, but I got the services.
Let's go to the part,
sort of really didn't matter. My point here is that
let's also go back to the part where you said maybe we have too many political parties in the country. What would be the ideal number of political parties in any country?
I think the numbers are not necessarily that would matter, but the primary lead opposition political parties should not be more than 2 or 3. and meaning therefore that, as I said at the beginning, and maybe to be a bit of boring thing, that politics should be very much about issues of taxation, about public service, about the environment, about agriculture, about education, about spends, about security, about infrastructure, about law and order. And when you stick to that, you know.
So when you say one political party should be leading, please break that leadership down to for the rest of the opposition parties.
I think what is urgent at the moment is whether or not there is sufficient space for the opposition to operate, whether or not the media are not compromised, whether or not the judiciary is not compromised, whether or not this regime is delivering what should be delivering in terms of infrastructure. As I said, my Nagonga Road continues to be hounded. Nagonga Busolo Road, actually, it should talk to our good brother Chris when he comes back. Whether or not education, as we are discussing today, over the last 3 days I've been getting several telephone conversation calls from people, some people who are very much grieved they can't afford to pay school fees for their children. But at the same time, yesterday I was talking to a young graduate at 23 who had no clue that part of the responsibility of the state is to create an enabling environment in which post her graduation there are jobs. But in many cases that actually in the previous administration before she was born under UPC government that universal education was universally free.
Okay. Sheikh Kasim, I'd like you to respond to that, just that element, because primarily all the opposition parties that have generated, most of them, at least the strong ones, have been really out of conflict, internal conflicts, and then they step aside and generate another party altogether. And so if we were to have one political party leading the opposition, what's the translation of that to the division of ideology that already cuts across?
You see, we are operating in a constitutional government whereby whatever political step we take is guided by the laws of the country. And part of these laws include the Political Parties and Organization Act of 2005, then amendment of 2020, which has remained silent on how many political parties in terms of the strength should take lead, but has opened a gap for every political party. Actually, last time I checked, we had more than 29 political parties.
True.
Most of them silent, and others, of course, the few vibrant ones. So I wouldn't agree with my brother that we need to have 1 or 2 political parties leading, because it's not provided for by the law. The law is open that if I dissent in my political party, for example, if I have one, then I should have an alternative. However, if we look at progressive democracies, I always want to draw examples from these other European countries. Why? Because the democracy we have in Uganda is not organic. It's not our own democracy. It is an imported democracy. And drawing one example from for example, the UK, the US, you find that you have got either 1 or 2 dominant political parties. You either have the Labour Party, or you have the Conservative, or you have the Democrats or the Republicans. So if we take that line, I think it would be advantageous in the sense that you would have clear agendas for the ruling party and for the opposition. That when there is an issue, for example, 1997, when Tony Blair became a prime minister, if I'm not mistaken, he picked up one of the policies of opposition, because the problem then was asylum seekers, the immigration law. And opposition had picked on it and had generated momentum. So what they did was to pick up on it as a government, make it one of the legislation agendas, and it made Bolia very popular. So I want to agree with him that when we have one political party which is in opposition and leading, we can have an amalgamation of ideas from both opposition and government, and we can see service being delivered. But where we have got political parties that their main agenda is Museveni agende, Museveni should go, then we always as a country we don't get satisfied from the performance of these political parties, because their agendas are not clear, they can't be adopted in legislation, and you end up losing out on the role that political parties should play in promoting democracy and service delivery in the country. So I would pick on his point.
Okay.
If we are in that progressive democracy, but
so
where we are
many
in
of them
emotional
have been
democracy like
formed
Uganda.
on
But
the line
we ever had a progressive democracy here, and it actually worked when politics was clear.
Speaking in the present, where I'm in the present.
Okay, so past, present, let's talk about the future. Of which the future then begs the question, how do we get to localized democracy? But coming back to the present discussion that we're having, throwing lenses on the National Unity Platform, councilors, and that argument of that closed meeting with the NRM leadership, they were aligned at the party offices, and they stated the case that they did not attend. However, they were aware that such a meeting did exist and that some of them had been contacted, and so it lives in a quagmire space. Just because the opposition, should they not sit in the same room with the ruling government in order to deliberate on the future of this country? And again, context being future here. But also there's another element that then is drawn in from this conversation, the fact that there's a lot of crisscrossing. In this current term that we're looking at, gentlemen, we have had crisscrossing of members from one political party to another political party. Best examples would be the by-elections that we've had so far in this elective term, and how this morning you see one member being flagged as the FDC aspirant in that direction, and then the next morning they wake up and they are the NRM. Sheikh Kasim, it's been noted that the NRM is buying and bribing opponents in order to retain power and make sure there's no resistance in certain regions.
You see, the cardinal role of opposition, especially in democracies where politics is not based on ideas, but is based on emotions, is creating a perception. So as of today, NUP, FDC, DPUPs have to create a perception that whoever crosses or whoever, because politics is not like the sun or Lake Victoria that can't shift. People always wake up and shift. My brother told us that they were once UNC, Uganda National Congress, then it became UPC. So there was a shift from one position to another. And so people will always shift. But to create a situation which keeps political parties relevant and attractive to the populace is to create a perception that whoever crosses a line, whoever shifts from one area to another has been bought. But if we can interrogate, for example, if we can interrogate the senior leadership of NRM, most of them were born before 1960. They once had a subscription to some other political parties, but today they're in NRM. The former Prime Minister, Dr. Uganda, was once a UPC youth winger. So should we come here and say he became UPM because he was bought, he was purchased? No. People change ideologies. People change the look of things. And progressively, people shift from one position to another, especially for the progress of their countries. So it is not correct that whoever changes a goalpost shifts because he has been bought.
It's also not wrong for the NRM to see a strong candidate and
yes,
have the closed door meeting.
Yes.
To have them convinced that they should stand under the yellow card.
Priscilla, that's one of the things I wanted to say today, that actually in principle it's not.
It's not, yes.
The issue is the object, the politics. At the end of the day, their job is to fish out the best. It's the responsibility of the position to make sure that we fish out the best.
How else are they going to stay on top of their game if they don't fish the best?
As I wanted my point, it's not even new in the politics of Uganda that people have crossed even from, actually we are lucky that we haven't seen a cross on the floor of parliament in our days. But in the days of UPC, the first government of Uganda, we had a cross of members of parliament from one side to another in parliament. But of course we can't also rule out the possibility that some people could be shifting because of wanting personal gains, because of the shift in the strength of parties and the tide. We saw it here. We had the Subi in 2014. Young men crossed, and of course the wave by then was that, Subi. They had seats in parliament, they had seats in the council. We had a shift when FDC was reform agenda, powerful. People shifted. And of course, when NUP came on board, people shifted. I don't want to suggest that NUP also paid the people who shifted from DP to NUP. No. The issue is some people would want also to have mileage, political mileage for their own personal benefit, and they will shift. So let us not cast a blame on NRM. It is a shared, it is a world-known phenomena where people will jump from a vessel to another, as long as they can achieve.
Which goes back to something Joseph mentioned. The cases, one of the cases is me, myself, and I kind of politics. I want it for myself. The other thing that you mentioned is for political or financial gain that comes with being a politician in Uganda, to be exact.
Being in politics, they're not politicians. Politicians don't seek financial gains.
Okay.
Politicians seek to push the values, the ideological agenda that they believe in, to translate society and make it better.
Okay, so being in politics. So, and of course, we've also been, we've also had the element, whether confusion or not, we've also had the element of commercialization of our politics. So all these three in tandem, what's the translation of that onto our opposition politics?
It's generally actually quite concerning, and as I said, I'm not quite sure whether I've been coherent in the space this morning as far as my thoughts on this matter is concerned. As I said, I agree with Kasim, and I raised this on his behalf, that actually we saw members crossing to UPC in the 60s and 80s, but those crossing in the 60s were not people not being bought, nor were people crossing for personal gains. People were crossing for convictionist purposes. And number two, government then genuinely delivered for the people. And at the same time, those people were not crossing because we wanted to weaken the opposition. People were crossing because our position was popular, people-centered. At the moment, I'm not quite sure whether people who go to NRA because NRA is not necessarily good, but rather because NRA is seeking to provide fodder for themselves and for, in many cases, for their pockets. Now, I think, Priscilla, going forward, opposition political parties very urgently, while we continue to criticize Mr. Museveni, we need to very critically look inward into ourselves why some of these things are actually happening. I believe in many cases there is insufficient internal democracy in the political parties, in all political parties, including NRA anyway. In NRA, if there was democracy, Mr. Museveni's son would not be forming a political organization and is serving army officer, and then they put some people in yellow, and cabinet ministers, go in to address his thing, and then they criticize their own thing. So some of these things are neither here nor there. But much more urgently, really, is for the opposition political parties. We need to provide the leadership that is required. We need to create enabling environments where ideas are able to be pulled together and used and nurtured and used as a basis on which to provide alternative programs for our people against whatever NRA will have said. That's what we need to do. And the more we do that, I think the more people will be attracting people. But the problem though is this one: the political space is not leveled. The reality is that the three arms of government seem to be an extension of the executive, and the executive in this case is a personality in the name of Mr. Museveni, unfortunately. And while that happens, most young people that I interact with, and thankfully many of them are joining UPC very much, of course, even amidst the confusion in UPC, at least my kind of UPC, many of them are coming to me and having this conversation. People are generally not very clear whether or not whatever they're doing long term is the way politics should be participated. Many people are putting hopes and expectations on leaders. I'm not sure whether at the moment there is sufficient leadership, both from the opposition and in this case from NRA. In NRA there's no leadership. NRA there's a space for people to go ahead and eat, and you'll ask my good friend Norbert Mao, because it's best to present and to clearly articulate, particularly before he joined NRA, what it is that people go to NRA basically to eat. So that's a big motivation to many young people, unfortunately.
Okay, all right. You have mentioned leveling the political space. What does that mean?
I think it should be the case that when time comes for campaigns...
And how can it be done?
When time comes for campaigns, all political parties should be given fair access, both in the media and on the grounds. And then number two, the unnecessary use of the military services, security forces, particularly the army and the police. And then three, the fact that today, if I want to go and have a conversation in Bali, I should be able to go to RDC's office and say, I'm a UPC leader, I'm in town, I'm doing this, and I should be given access and opportunities to be able to provide those kind of services. And if I have a matter in court, the matter in court should not be politicized. It should be on the basis of the evidence provided. And that if at the end of the day, a young person says that the members of UPC are joining UPC, they should not be looking behind their back to simply say that, well, I fear being followed, which is something which is actively happening. And as long as that continues to happen, and as long as there are younger people of your age group who want to join the National Assembly and they're saying that, well, which ticket is likely to take me, it has to be either one because they have money, and then two because they would secure service, and three because they rig it on my behalf. That's basically what I'm trying to talk about.
Okay, all right. You also did make mention of ideology and how most political parties are founded on the ideology that he must leave. So when that day does come and he leaves, that means that there's going to be collapse.
And a collapse post-Museveni. I am challenged from UPC perspective that the sooner we're able to reorganize ourselves and put our house in order, the more we shall be able to go around the country and repopularize the values and foundations around which we are built, so that that becomes the popular ideology that will be able to push this country forward, particularly in areas around question of employment and unemployment, questions about education, questions about health services, question about infrastructure, and question very urgently about youth unemployment and the environment, which is actually a critical thing going forward.
Okay. Sheikh Kasim, yes. This one is a very interesting question. How can the opposition survive and present themselves as the alternative to solutions we need?
When you look at the current party in government, and I want to speak as an individual because I don't speak for the party, it has got what stands for, the four principles, which are clear and which were born out of necessity. If it is patriotism, there has to be love for your country. Pan-Africanism, you have to stand beyond Uganda. The problems of another country should be your problems. Democracy, and of course socio-economic transformation. And to me, these are principles which shall be there whether President Museveni is the chairman of the party or not. Now, for opposition political parties to stand out and convince Ugandans that they are the alternative, my brother is saying UPC is for the future. It was there, 1960s it was there.
Okay.
And because maybe it didn't have the clear ideology for the country, then it rescinded back to where it is. It should be a lesson.
Okay. Let's leave that matter there because of time constraints.
Yes. It should be a lesson for other political parties to build themselves around a clear ideology that convinces people that this is what the country as a whole wants. Not converging around individuals, converging around emotions, converging around slogans.
There's something else that is parallel to that I want us to discuss in a minute as we wrap up this conversation. In parallel to the opposition pressures that are existing, there's also the civic space pressures that are existing. You mentioned the reform agenda, then Can People Power. Now we do have the Patriotic League of Uganda.
Yes.
Let's talk about these. They're not political parties, however they're doing political activism.
Actually, for me, I'm very happy that as of now, the younger people of Uganda they are waking up to the fact that their country needs them.
Hence the Patriotic League.
Their country needs them.
Needs them, meaning that the rest of you are relevant?
You see,
irrelevant, actually. That's what they're saying. If that's what you're saying, that we need them, then what? Then Sheikh, where are you?
You see, there is where Uganda was in 1960. There is where Uganda was in 1980. There is where Uganda is now, and there is where Uganda must be.
Okay.
Now, for where Uganda must be, there has to be a cross-check of ourselves, and then we see which vehicles can keep us moving not receding back to where we were in the 70s.
Okay.
So it's really about recognizing that neoliberal agenda that NRA pushed for has failed. So we need to revisit what was then, which is absolutely relevant today, meaning that actually providing, pushing for a government which is actually socially, socio-democratically driven, which is basically big government, big taxes, but big taxes to deliver public services and big taxes to provide for key services like education, health and infrastructure and agriculture and environment. That really is what this country needs.
Taken. I want to this point. Now, yes, for
you have 30 seconds.
For PRU, it is one of the civic organizations, like how People Power came, Reform Agenda came, because there is no law in Uganda which bars civic organizations from coming up.
Okay.
So everybody can come up with what fits the current need of the country. What we need as Uganda is reviving the spirit of patriotism, which PRU stands for. Fighting corruption, which PRU stands for.
Okay, so these are the very same things and agendas and manifestos that the current government has presented. So the existing or emergency of such civic organizations is really trying to say that perhaps the government is not doing their job primarily, but that's a conversation that we'll pick up on another Monday. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us here Morning at NTV. Yeah. We'll take a short break. We'll turn to the State Minister for Education to give us an enlightenment on what the minister did come out to say, the 12 fees that will be scrapped off, the tuition, the school fees generally for the next term, and how that's going to impact education positively. Do stay with us.